Hey guys, so following on from our last couple of specials, we have John Gray. He is of the HR Nicholl Society, at least he was formerly. I think there's a bit of information there I'm lacking. Either way, this was a fantastic interview and actually something really worth watching. So, hey guys, check out our uncut version of Dean's interaction with John Gray.
Again. Righto, ladies and gentlemen, Resolute TV, this is going to be episode 4. We've got John Gray, who's the Executive Director of a group called the HR Nicholl Society. It's a human relations style group. He's going to tell us all about it, and then we're going to discuss some of the things that they're up to and what they've been doing and what they stand for and why they stand for it and how that's of benefit to you. So, John, tell us, what's the HR Nicholl Society? What's it all about, mate?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Dean. I appreciate it. It's a great opportunity to let people know what we're all about. And essentially, HR Nicholl Society is it's Australia's only dedicated industrial relations think tank. So we focus purely on industrial relations, labour market reforms, essentially looking at advocating for voluntary relationships between employees and employers. And so we've been doing that for, well, since 1986. There were four blokes that started the society, including well-known Treasurer Peter Costello under the Howard government. And essentially our vision is a fair go for every Australian where freedom, prosperity and opportunity can flourish free from coercion. So we're no different to any of the other sort of free market, classical liberal think tanks. We fully believe that the government's intervention into the economy and into industrial relations policy leaves people worse off than they would be if we had free market policies. So essentially just advocating for those free market policies.
Okay, so the first thing I could see anybody questioning you on there is, what about evil employers who are slave driving their employees? That's going to be the first thing anybody's going to ask me when I talk about what you've just said, which I do all the time, to be fair. How do you answer it? How do you respond to that? And how do you sort of tackle the whole evil employer versus evil government argument? I mean, I sort of see both as being or capable of being negative, and both are capable of being positive.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of the things that people raise a lot. And the problem with that sort of argument and asking that question is it assumes that there is a power imbalance between employers and employees, which just isn't the case. So employers need workers. Now, I'm not talking about labor theory of value or anything like that. It's not Marxism. But without employees, employers do not have the capacity or the capability to create the product that they need to create, or whatever industry they're in. People need workers, right? That we know. Now, there's this idea that there is this imbalance, but if you look at it from the perspective of employers need employees, then you realize that the employee actually has a fair amount of they have a fair amount of influence in the relationship. And I guess that's where you're talking about unions, and that's why unions crop up. And I don't have an issue with unions and employees banding together and creating these sort of associations. I believe in freedom of association 100%. Where that becomes an issue is where the unions stop working for the workers and start working for their mates. And that's what we've seen with the CFMMEU and the ACTU and the like. They don't actually care about their workers as much as they say they do. So when you come at it from the premise that there is a power imbalance, then the idea of exploitation and evil workers or evil employers seems to be a huge issue, right? And we do see it sometimes. And in those cases, there are laws that exist to cater for if someone's breaking the law, if someone is exploiting someone, then we do have laws in place to cater for that anyway. But the majority of employers in Australia, at least, I'm not talking about third world countries, the majority of employers in Australia are actually just regular people. They're regular folk. So if you look at the most recent statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, 63% of Australian businesses are not employing. And so you've got 37% there that employ people. Now, of that 37%, something I think I read these statistics the other day, up to 70% of those employ between 1 and 4 people. So you're not looking at big business. You're not looking at medium to large business in Australia. You are simply looking at mum and pop shops, everyday Australians that are creating these businesses, and they need employees. Big business in Australia accounts for 0.2% of all businesses. So I'm not saying you don't have exploitation. I'm not saying there isn't sometimes a power imbalance, but we need to look at it from the numbers. And the numbers they really don't suggest that there is this imbalance, and they don't suggest that these regular, ordinary Australian business owners will exploit workers.
No, which I would imagine is fairly standard. It's like anything, though. There's always somebody who will do the wrong thing, and unfortunately what society currently does is they punish from the lowest common denominator, as opposed to going 85% of these people are doing the right thing, 15% aren't doing the wrong thing. Well, let's just punish everybody and make it harder for everybody to operate.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's one of the other things that you need to look at when you talk about this power imbalance or exploitation is the ease for employees and employers to move on. So right now we have this I guess we'll call it a prohibition on low paid work. Now that necessarily limits the number of jobs that are available. So as I said, 63% of Australian businesses don't employ anyone. They are sole trading businesses with no employees, or their family employees. Now, if we are removing the restriction on low paid work, we're suddenly going to see a lot more jobs opening up, which gives the power back to the employee. What that does is it just flips the supply and demand side of things. At the moment, we have a huge amount of demand for jobs and not a lot of supply. If we flip that and create a huge amount of a huge amount of demand, then necessarily wages will go up. Necessarily people will treat their employees better because they don't want to lose them. And
arguably the better performers as employees are rewarded disproportionately as opposed to like the blanket, every kid gets a trophy format, which is what our current work relations system sort of employs, is every kid deserves a trophy. You're all the same, you're all a number. Whereas what that means is you've got some people who are getting paid far in excess, in my opinion, than what their capabilities or production or contribution to any given business is worth. And then you've got people who are overperforming and probably not getting that extra dough because it's being siphoned off towards less productive, less useful. So you can't actually really reward those who are out trying to achieve and do good work. Would that be right within your frame of thinking, or am I sort of being an elitist?
No, I think a little bit that's right. What I'm more talking about is creating more jobs, and the more jobs there are, then the more choice an employee has, and employers then need to increase the work conditions. They need to increase the pay. If you want to get the best, as you're saying, in a pure meritocracy, if you want the best, then you need to pay for the best and you need to treat them like they are the best. Now, at the moment, what we have is a situation where, I know it's a different situation with coronavirus, and we're seeing unemployment jump maybe up to about 14%. We don't know. We're looking at 10% at the moment. And that's early numbers from the start of April. What we're seeing now is a lack of jobs. And it really is as simple as supply and demand. When there is more supply than there is demand, then prices are going to go down. And when there is less supply than there is demand, prices will go up. And it's no different with industrial relations and labour market. It's absolutely no different.
The oil price at the moment is a fairly good indicator of that. Nobody's leaving the house, nobody's driving anywhere, so the price of oil has tanked. That's
spot on. And so people tend to, when you take a good and you explain it to them like that, like you're saying with the oil, people understand that. They understand what you're talking about. The second that you take the good as a product and you replace it with a human, immediately people they lose their minds and they can't withdraw themselves from the emotion of the situation and look at it as, well, actually, your labor is a good. You are providing a good to someone to buy. That's all it is. That's it.
You're trading your time for cash.
That's it.
Well, hang on, we're not allowed to use cash anymore. A fiat currency that lands in your bank account via a computer screen.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're talking about Bitcoin, obviously.
Oh, I'm learning about Bitcoin. It's one of our little programs at the moment. Just you know, as you probably noticed with this program, we're touching on a few different things, and I figure as I learn it, other people will learn it, and it becomes really interesting way to do things. So, based on what you've just said, what's your opinion? Obviously, look, the coronavirus is a completely different thing. People are talking bailouts. I've always been pretty anti-bailout. The government really should have nothing to do with any of these things. But then I've also looked at a lot of scenarios, and I've seen it with farmers, and I've seen where the only reason these people are going broke is government interference. So is it fair to say that the government should be coming up with something for Virgin? If they were, under what conditions would you accept that? You know, how would you look at something like that from your position?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and it's something that I'm completely torn on because I don't believe in bailouts for companies. You know, if we talk specifically about Virgin, look at Richard Branson has sold off one of his islands in the Bahamas or something like that in the Bahamas to keep it afloat. That's fantastic. It's his company. If he has the assets to sell and to be able to keep it afloat, then he should. But when it gets tricky is, and this is why I'm torn on it, is exactly what you say, that it is a result of the government. Now, do I think that the reaction has been oversold, heavy-handed? Yes, I do. But I still think that there were some necessary restrictions on things, you know, and I think movement is one of those things. I don't believe that closing businesses here in West Australia at least was the best idea, and we can talk about why in a second. But because the government has effectively destroyed the business, I don't think that they should be able to avoid some of the repercussions and some of the blame, and so but where it gets tricky is that when we talk about bailouts, we're not talking about government money. The government doesn't have money. They have money that we give them to use. So I personally, you and I, Dean, we didn't shut down borders.
I would question the term give. I would question the term give them money. We don't give them money. It's forcibly taken.
Well, that's right. That's right. You know, we are talking about the correct use of language, and that's important. So they take our money, and they are now proposing to, well, you know, they may or may not be proposing. Certain states are looking at it. Victoria and Queensland, I think, were looking at it last I checked. But the reason why I'm so torn is, yes, the government did force this industry to close. Yes, they did force Virgin to go into administration, however which way you look at it. But the government themselves don't have any money to bail out Virgin for their mistakes. Let's look at it as, you know, Scott Morrison's worth, I don't know how much he's worth, maybe 10, 15 million, who knows. He might be worth less than that. I know Turnbull was worth in 50 to 60 million. If it is the decision of the people in the government to do so, then they need to take some of the responsibility. But that responsibility, if you're going to bail out, well, then you're not, it's our money. You see where I'm torn on this, and this is why I struggle to formulate my opinion on it, because you know, I feel
the same way.
It's a hard one. It's our money. There has to be other ways to go about it. But when you look at it, by the same token, Virgin is a business like any other, and the assets are there. The planes are still there. There is going to be demand. The demand will pick up once this is all over. I am certain that somebody else will pick up those assets. A new company will start up and thrive. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think a bailout is the last thing that we should be doing, purely because it's our money, it's taxpayer money, and we didn't make the decision to shut down the economy.
No, and I would argue then in turn, because Virgin's not the only company that's collapsed over the last 3 to 4 months or is close to collapse. if you're going to bail out Virgin or Qantas or any of the rest of them, you need to go through every little mum and pop shop, every little cafe, every little bar, every little restaurant that's struggling and suffering through this and losing money. Well, if you're going to bail them out, you would have to buy rights to maintain some sort of consistency, although we know that's not a strength. You would have to bail them all out as well to roughly the tune of whatever it is that they've been losing per month to keep them going, which, again, you're giving away taxpayer money to people who are, it's not necessarily through some fault of their own, although some could be. Obviously, you know, that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. And what makes Virgin more important than any other business, small or otherwise, you know, it's the government's fault that this has happened, that they've been shut down. And does the government need to take responsibility? Yes. Does that manifest itself in bailouts? I don't think so. Not in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's fairly reasonable. So with your work at the HR Nicholl Society, we were talking before, you were telling me about your pathway to prosperity. How do you guys recommend we start to fix this mess, which I'm convinced the whole country is in a mess, but I think that's most of the first world at the moment. Yep. What's your plan? How's HR? And there's, from what I understand, there's some pretty big brain power involved in the organisation. How do these people think the best way to move forward is?
Yeah, so we've come up with what we're calling the path back to prosperity, and we know that things aren't going to go back to where they were. We've been living through unprecedented times of prosperity. You know, we are living our best lives. Things are better than they've ever been, to be frank, and that's a fact. You cannot show me one area of say the economy or people's lives or across the world, the developing world, you can't show me one area that hasn't been getting better with time. And so our plan is, it's essentially looking at classical liberal values, classical liberal policies, things that have been tried and tested to work, and things that have been implemented here in Australia in the past that have allowed us to see these times of prosperity. Now, I have a really, it's one of my favorite quotes for right now for the coronavirus, and it's from Anne Bradstreet, and it's on our website on our Path Back to Prosperity. And it's, if we had no winter, the spring would not be so pleasant. If we did not sometimes taste of adversity, prosperity would not be so welcome. And I think that's a really wonderful quote, because we, especially in Australia and in the US and the UK and Western nations, we don't realize how good we've had it. We really don't realize how prosperous we've been. And people are unaware of the policies that were implemented, you know, back in the late 80s by the Hawke Keating governments that allowed us to have this prosperity. Or even if you go back to the start of Western civilization, you look at these policies and these values, and it's all based around free market capitalism. It's all based around classical liberal values, and it's all based around less government, more individual freedom, and personal responsibility. That is what it is, and it's so simple, and it creates outcomes that are best for everybody, and yet people are hesitant to trust the ideas. So our path back to prosperity, it's essentially these principles that have been changed a little bit for the current situation. So there's 5 pillars of what we're calling the path back to prosperity, and that's allowing low-paid work. So what we're talking about there is restrictions on lower hourly wages. We've got abolishing compulsory superannuation. The idea there is to give people more money in their pocket every week. We're looking at a regulatory holiday. So certain sections of the Fair Work Act, one particular section that comes to mind is the unfair dismissal, the regulation there, which essentially looks at 3 things, but one of the worst things about it is it looks at that the dismissal can't be harsh, which is a completely subjective measure. You know, if somebody's a terrible worker and they're stealing, and you fire them, they can go to the Fair Work Commission essentially and say, well, I have 5 kids to feed and a wife, and this was my only source of income. This dismissal was overly harsh, and the Fair Work Commission can turn to the employer and say, well, look, we understand that this person's a rubbish employee, but it's harsh. You can't fire them. So that's what we're talking about with regulatory holiday. And as well, a lot of things like liquor licensing laws and other zoning restrictions that come with different states, and really just it's a barrier to entry for new small businesses. Where the fourth pillar is streamlining awards. Now, with that, we know that we did have a streamline about a decade or so ago, where we went from thousands of awards down to around about 140. That's a great thing, right? Thousands to hundreds is a fantastic thing. But the idea was to create these awards that were just a number of pages long. And what we have now, they're so convoluted, they're so complex. You know, I work in the IR space, and my wife is a nurse, and I trawled for probably 4 hours through the Nurses Award for 2010 to figure out just how much she was entitled to be paid. You know, this is someone that works in the industry, and it took me hours for one employee, you know, because you're looking at different qualifications, different hours, different everything. So they're too complex. So streamlining awards, we're talking about it, making them really, really simple, easy to understand for employees and employers. And so we don't have these, you know, wage theft, you know, situations. And then the final one, it's not necessarily about industrial relations or labour market reform, but it's slashing taxes. And for a start, we need to slash the corporate tax rate. We're up at 30%. It's the highest in the OECD. We need to be down around about the 20% mark. Getting rid of abolishing payroll tax, which is literally a tax on jobs, and reducing the income tax. So there are our 5 pillars. There's nothing new in those. There's nothing fantastical or fancy or flashy. It is purely classical liberal free market capitalist principles at work that will bring us back to prosperity.
Things that will work and traditionally have worked, and that's what we need. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the wage theft. Obviously, the industry that I've spent the last 20 odd years in, you know, and you look at it, it's perfect because it's a quagmire of industrial relations sort of confusion and rubbish. And you know, you've got award wages for kids that are ridiculous and unsustainable. I mean, and hospitality is one of the more unsustainable businesses in certainly the Australian market. I'm not sure the exact statistics, but the number of restaurants that fail within the first 5 years is certainly outpacing most other industries. And there's multiple reasons for that, but I would argue quite comfortably that one of them is the minimum wage rates are excessive for the level of skill work that's required. The prices, the market just doesn't allow for it. If people are still spending $20 for lunch, but you're paying a 15-year-old $20 an hour, give or take, you're automatically behind the 8 ball. You got to put an awful lot of bums on seats to make that even close to viable.
So let's just take a minute to talk about minimum wage. It's one of the things that it is political suicide. It's a huge no-no, and one of the wrong arguments that people make a lot of the time is that the wages. Sorry, that's not what I'm thinking about there. One of the wrong arguments that people talk about is essentially wages going up and down based on the minimum wage, right? And I'm talking about people who want to abolish the minimum wage. They focus on the wrong thing. So the minimum wage can be a good thing. The minimum wage is a fantastic thing. So when we talk about raising the minimum wage, people say, well, we're going to lose jobs. That's not necessarily true. You're not necessarily going to lose jobs. The minimum wage is great for people who are employed. I don't know anyone that doesn't want a wage increase. And increasing minimum wage isn't going to necessarily make people lose their jobs. It's great for those people that are in that industry. It's great for those people that are at the bottom of the rung. Where minimum wage is a terrible, terrible thing, and this is something that we need to be focusing on, that we're not, as you know, as think tanks, we're not focusing on the right areas, is it is a rung into the employment market. So if you think of it like a ladder and the minimum wage are the bottom 3 rungs, increase the minimum wage, you remove the bottom three rungs. So where minimum wage hurts the most is unskilled, unemployed, disabled, Indigenous, people that don't have the right look, don't have the right attitude. That's who it hurts the most. So it's a great thing. Minimum wage increases are a great thing for people in work and for people on minimum wage. Don't get me wrong. It's fantastic. They're probably not going to lose their jobs. But we have this unemployment rate that is, especially now with coronavirus, is skyrocketing. We might even get up to 15%. And those people will not have jobs to enter into. And one of the arguments that the left make about minimum wage and lowering the minimum wage is that these people will not have enough money to live, right? That they're going to be on minimum wage forever, and if it's not a living wage, then they're stuffed. But I recall some research from the Institute of Public Affairs. I was reading it the other day. It was released in 2018, I believe, by Curtly Wallace. And what that showed was that after 5 years, 75% of people on minimum wage were, I think, had doubled their wage, or they were out of the minimum wage bracket. So don't quote me on those. You can find it online on the IPA website. But it's a fallacy to think that people stay on minimum wage. Sure, some people will, and those people will stay on minimum wage. Well, it's an entry point, and some people will stay on minimum wage because that is what their labor is worth. That is the value of what they're providing, right? Just because, I can charge out however much I want because I know I do a good job. I know that I'm good at what I do, and people can rely on me to do what they need.
And there is a market looking for what you do. It's a bit like,
that's right.
I started out, and there are people I know who started out on far less. My original wage in my apprenticeship was $5.95 an hour. And, when you say things like that, talking to people who are sort of screaming about the minimum wage, well, how could you live on that? That's not a living wage. Well, no, it wasn't a living wage. I lived in a caravan. I struggled my ass off. Mum and Dad helped. I ate canned baked beans and food at work, and it wasn't easy and it wasn't glamorous, but worked your ass off, and then you go through, and then you get your little pay rise, and then you get your little pay rise, then you get your little pay rise, and then you can start sort of going all right. And it seems very deluded for me to think that people go, well, you can't live on that. Well, no, you're not designed to live on that. The idea is to get you in the door, and then you perform to the level that you improve, where people go, oh, I'll throw more money at that guy, winner. We can't live without, we don't want to lose you, here's more money. That's always been my take on it.
And that's exactly right. And that is the thing that we don't understand in this country and in most countries, is that it is not a livable wage. It is not designed to be a livable wage. It is designed to allow people who have no skills, who have no work experience, who have never done anything in a particular industry before. It is designed to allow those people to get their foot in the door, to build those skills and experience, where employers may not necessarily be able to afford $21 an hour, which is roughly what the minimum wage is right now. If you lower the minimum wage to $15, let's take you, for example, right? When you were first starting out, you said $5 an hour. If the minimum were $5, whatever it was an hour, let's say you're starting out work now, right? And the minimum wage is $20, and you're starting out, you have no skills, and it's you and it's me, and I'm a professional chef, and you're just starting out. You've just finished your apprenticeship. I'm willing to work for $20 an hour, $21 an hour, which is the minimum wage. No one's going to hire you. They just won't, because if they can get someone that has more skills and more experience, they're going to take that person. That's how it works.
Being realistic, when I was on $5.95 an hour, I was overpaid based on my skills and ability. Yes, I showed up. Yes, I worked really hard, but I had no idea. And, you sort of, for lack of a better term, everything you touch, everything you do, you stuff up because you've got no idea. You're just trying to fumble your way through a whole new skill set. You're not even worth that $5.95 an hour. Back in the old days for chefs, and chefs are notoriously a tough industry to be doing these sort of things in. But the old days in France or wherever, the father would take the son, drop him at whichever restaurant, and say, there, you own him for 4 years. And they put you up for board, and you learn a skill, and you come out of it being at the level of a Michel Roux or somebody who's on the next level plane, and you go through that to get to that level. Obviously, we're scared of all that sort of stuff in today's society. And I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing.
I'm studying a law degree. people may know that I was in the Navy for 8 years, did a change of career and sort of went into and policy and whatnot. But I am in my final year of a law degree, and I currently work at a law firm, just a boutique firm, and I do it for less than minimum wage, which is illegal. I mean, if you're watching this, sue me. I don't give a shit. It's illegal, but I don't have any skills as a law student. Yeah, sure, I've got some life skills, but in law, I don't have any skills. Now, I can do the most menial tasks. When I first started last year, I could do the most menial tasks. I don't have the knowledge or the experience to be able to do it at a level where the award, I believe, is something like $27 an hour. Now, the bloke I work for, he would do it himself. If it's the choice between 27 an hour or doing it himself, he's going to bloody do it himself. But because I walked in there and said, hey, look, mate, I'm willing to work for $20 an hour. If you take me on, I'll come in here, I'll learn.
Teach me something.
Teach me something. And I've had conversations with him. He goes, oh, look, mate, if you want to be paid more, then, we can have a conversation about it. I said, mate, this is the agreement. I came in here and this is the agreement. When I feel like I am doing work at a level that warrants $27 an hour, I'll let you know. But right now, I'm pretty happy sitting here on $20 an hour. It helps you. It helps me, gives me skills and experience. And I'm not going to be on $20 an hour as a lawyer. It's just not going to happen. But the skills and experience I am getting will help me in the future to get a better job. And that's how minimum wage works. And so what we're having now is we're having people working for free. You can work for free. You can do a free internship at a law firm. No problem. But if you're working there, you're entitled to 27 an hour. So it's either 27 an hour or it's nothing. And I don't know about you, but I would be willing to do that for $20 an hour. And I am. I practice what I preach. I'm doing it, and it's working out well for me, and it's working well for him. And that's why we need to lower the minimum wage.
Which is a win-win, which is what it's all about. For business, right. It's zero job. I've got 0 jobs at $27. At $15 an hour, I've got 2 jobs. So what would you like? Or whatever the case may be. And you sort of look at it and you think, it's just become so tedious and expensive to employ people, particularly at that lower level, that it's, and you're so responsible for them. That's the other area is, I mean, I read something the other day from our illustrious Victorian Premier, who he'd like to bring it in that if, and I can't remember the exact wording, but the general gist of what he put out was if you're an employer and one of your employees commits suicide while they're employed by you, you as the employer are responsible. I think if somebody employed by John Gray jumps in front of a train, I'm not sure how that is, unless you're pushing the guy, or you know what I mean. That sort of stuff terrifies me. I mean, what are your thoughts on things like that, other than the fact that he's mad?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I don't know if you can put the words Daniel Andrews and sensible in the same sentence. The guy's a bloody fool, and I hope he sees this because he's a dickhead. He is destroying that.
I'll definitely be leaving that portion in, mate. It's mate, no problem there. I'm happy to
leave it in.
That.
Leave it in and bloody tweet it to him. I don't care. He's a dickhead. Industrial manslaughter laws are what you're talking about. At the HR Nicholl Society conference last year in Melbourne, we actually had a discussion on these laws. David Limbrick, MP from the Liberal Democrats down there in Victoria, he came and spoke to the society about that. And essentially what you're saying is right. It's frightening. It is really, really frightening. But what you're talking about there, it's becoming so expensive to employ people. What I was talking about with the Fair Work Act and the unfair dismissal laws, it's almost impossible to get rid of an employee these days. And so if you're going to hire someone, then you want to make sure that they're the right person before you even hire them. If we ease those restrictions, allow employees and employers to move around freely, voluntary relationships, well, you're going to find that people will be more willing to hire people. Now, I talked about the ABS statistics earlier. One thing that was absolutely shocking to me was non-employing businesses are growing 5 times faster than employing businesses in this country as of last year. 5 times faster for non-employing businesses. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that screams the need for reform. It is too difficult, too risky, too dangerous to hire an employee. So you've got the minimum wage, you've got regulation, You've then got things, if you're a little bit bigger, you've got payroll tax, which if you hire a certain amount of people, you're going to be paying more tax. The government doesn't want people in jobs. They want people on welfare, because then they can control what they do. You look at welfare cards, you look at no jab, no pay, those sorts of things. When citizens are on welfare, it allows the government to control them, and people don't get that. They think the government's there to help them. They're not. The government's there to help themselves, as we've seen. They're not there to help you. And the sooner people realize that we are better off working together voluntarily under the current laws of, life, liberty, and sort of the laws of life, liberty, and happiness, we have courts to enforce contracts. Why don't we just have individual voluntary contracts between employees and employers, get the government out of it, and we're all better off for it?
Well, you'd certainly get no argument from me on that one, John. I'm 100% on board. The only area I noticed you and I have had a couple of little debates recently about the no jab, no work thing regarding private companies. And I guess that's a little bit of an area where I think, for those who don't know, John and I have known each other on and off for probably 2 years now, give or take. We've met a few times and had a few beers and things and chewed the fat. I can see where you're coming from. Your argument is always, as a private business, they're entitled to dictate that to you. My biggest concern is the way government's encroaching, as shown through all this coronavirus stuff, how insidious it can be. How long before we're not allowed to leave our houses without a jab? How long before we're not allowed to walk into a business such as Woolworths unless we can prove that we've been vaccinated from the flu, the cold, the mumps, the measles? Where's your vaccination certificate? Where's your paperwork? Where's your barcode proving that you're vaccinated? I guess I sort of do agree that as a private business you have that choice, but it does worry me, particularly with the mega corporations, because I'm convinced that governments and mega corporations are in a really unholy marriage, and it does worry me. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I understand your concerns. I'm personally pro-vaccination. I don't see anything wrong with it. What I do take issue with is government mandating. Now, I mentioned no jab, no pay. Look, if you're taking taxpayer dollars, then the government is able to put conditions on it. In terms of forcing people to have vaccinations, absolutely not. It's heinous. It's a war crime. As far as I'm concerned, being forced to put anything inside your body against your will is one of the most. It's the worst violation of human rights that I can possibly imagine. But in terms of private companies, look, I get it. I understand that there are these concerns, but they are a private company and they can put conditions on employment. They can put conditions on entry. It's as simple as that. Now, my concerns would be eased a little bit, and I think yours would too, is if we had these reforms and if we were able to get the government out of business, then there would be more competition. And I know you posted something about an early learning childhood centre needing vaccinations, right? Childcare is so entwined in government operations. It's really not a free market whatsoever. There is no competition. It's like banks. It's like private health insurance. There's no real competition. What we don't live in a free market capitalist society. We live in a corporatist society where big business can lobby the government, and because the government has the power to intervene and has the power to control things, the people with the most money will go to the government, and because the government, the politicians, they're all self-interested, they all want to be re-elected, they're going to take money, they're going to take favors, they're going to take tips, they're going to do that because they're self-interested. To think that the people that we elect are somehow above us morally and ethically is completely wrong. And in most times, they are so far.
And in saying that, you're probably correct. They are all self-interested, but so is every other citizen. So, and you and I both, we're familiar with quite a few politicians. We're on friendly basis with quite a few. So you're not demonising them as individuals. It's human nature that they will wheel and deal. And I would be the same. I weigh up every day, every interaction. So do you. So does everybody who's watching this or who will be watching this. Mm-hmm. We're not demonising politicians as individuals, but it is part of human nature, and that's the thing that worries me.
Yeah, that's right. So now, where I have issue with the government and politicians being self-interested is that they are in a position of power, right? They will use their self-interest and they will use it against people. And the problem we have, we don't live in a meritocracy. We don't live in a truly free market capitalist society. It's corporatism at its finest. And so you and I, if we want to lobby government to pass some sort of regulation or some law that will assist our business, well, they're not going to listen to us. They're going to listen to someone like Woolworths because they're larger. They have more money. Now, the solution is not to. So I was talking to someone yesterday about auto-liberalism. I'd never heard the term. It's something that they brought out in Germany after World War II. It's essentially limiting economic power of companies so that we don't create monopolies. And I think that comes at it from a completely wrong standpoint. We need to limit political power because I wish I could find the quote, but in this document, it basically said that we need to limit economic power because then those that have political power will wield it to those with the most economic power. Now, I don't know about you, but reducing economic power is just going to create waste. But there's going to be money on the table. I want to limit political power. That's what we need to be limiting. Don't give the people in Parliament, the politicians who are necessarily self-interested, do not give them the ability to use their position to create their own profits or create some, to make things better for themselves. We need to limit that power, and that's where I stand on it. So in terms of going back to the discussion on vaccines, if we implement the policies that the HR Nicholl Society advocates for, and other places like the Centre for Independent Studies, the IPA, the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, AIP up in Brisbane, if we implement these policies and we reduce the size of government, we get to a point where we're able to have more competition. And you know this. I mean, I'm preaching to the converted, but anyone listening will probably know as well. But we need to limit the ability of the government to give favors to businesses and give favors to corporations. And that goes again to talking about Virgin and the bailouts. If we limit the government's ability to help or provide something for these big businesses, and we have a level playing field where small businesses are on exactly the same level playing field as big business, and that's what this auto-liberalism talks about. If we do that, then you'll find that monopolies will come and go. They always have. It's the government that protects monopolies. Coles and Woolies and the like, Baptists and bootleggers is a term that comes to mind, with Coles and Woolies and the plastic bag ban and all that kind of thing. And if you don't know what Baptists and bootleggers is, have a Google and think about the plastic bag ban and Coles and Woolies while you're reading about it. But reducing the size of government and not allowing them to do that will see monopolies come and go. It will see competition, and it will see the best product get to the top, and it always will. You don't have companies that were monopolies in the 90s still being monopolies now, right? IBM comes to mind and the like in car companies, and it just doesn't happen.
Blockbuster Blockbuster was dominant for Netflix. Got up and just all of a sudden better service, better pricing, no late fees, done. Sorry, buy Blockbuster, you're gone. It's a matter of they got better, or Netflix produced better results, and the other streaming services. They came up with a better model and a better product, and it's how it works. That's how nature works, really. It's not
a perfect example is the taxi industry. Now, Uber and Ola and Didi and all of these industries that use technology to their advantage. We used to have a monopoly in taxi services. But the thing is, it was a government-created monopoly. So you had to buy your plates from the government. And in Western Australia here, the government bailed out the taxi industry and were plate buyback. And I didn't have an issue with that because it was a government-created problem. And when a government creates the problem, they need to take responsibility for it. And again, it's our money. I get that. But it's not fair to say, look, you need to buy a license here. And then other companies come in and don't need licenses. That's not a level playing field. And that's not the taxi industry's fault per se. I'm sure they did a lot of lobbying for that to create their own monopoly. And, you can lobby government to create a monopoly. That's how businesses do it. That's how monopolies do it.
Yeah.
And the government will protect that monopoly. But, you know, when it's a level playing field, we don't need to pay our money. We don't need to spend it. And that's why we need to reduce regulations. And I could talk for hours on this. And one of the things that I just want to sort of put a pin in, and perhaps we'll talk about it on another episode.
In future episodes, yeah, sure.
Yeah, is occupational licensing. You know, that's essentially just government created monopolies, and people talk about you know, the healthcare system in the US, and it's broken, and it is, and that's because of occupational licensing. And you know, you need a license to be a hairdresser. Well, why? I mean, if you're shit at giving haircuts, no one's going to go to you. So why do you need a license to say that you can give haircuts, right? Just let anyone, honestly, just let anyone do it. If it's not going to kill you, let anyone do it. A painter. I don't care if my painter has a license. If they are good at their job, if they paint my house to a standard, I don't care if they've got a license or not. And so that's occupational licensing, creates monopolies. And, you know, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is the government being the issue. And all issues in the world, I'm sure, absolutely all of them, you can quote me on this, put this in big quotes. Every issue in the world today is as a result of government power.
I'd agree with you 100%, mate. I see very little value in government, and anything they put forward as but without government, you can go, yeah, but if it provided value, you wouldn't need the government to fund it, run it, and steal your money to fund it. One of my big arguments always, I come from a long line of people who have been in swimming, you know, pool superintendents, competitive swimmers, all that sort of stuff. And it always baffled me as to why local councils have to run these swimming pools. And people go, oh, but if they didn't, the pool would close. And I go, that tells you all you need to know. Either the prices have to go up and pay that difference, or the volunteers need to run it, or whatever. But in the event that it closes because there's not enough people using it and the council has to fund it, shouldn't be there. There's not enough people interested in using it. Therefore, right. It's non-viable. And it's a hard one, because I usually have that discussion with family members who are very, very passionate about the swimming pool industry. You know, they've fed their family on that industry and in that role for many years, and it is a community service and all that. But my argument is always, if the people aren't coming, it's not a viable industry, and you can't force people to pay for that out of their rates and whatever else. That's sort of it's a disingenuous way to do it. You can't make me pay for your proclivity to go swimming. You know, that's always been one of my thoughts. But
yeah, look, I 100% agree. And, you know, the issue of local councils is one that, yeah, look, I mean, local councils, regulation, bureaucrats. I mean, we could talk for hours, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
We may well do over the next few months with this channel. We'll see how we go. We might get you on every couple of weeks or whatever, and we'll give it a bit of a bash.
Absolutely. And look, before we wrap up, I feel like it's sort of a natural wrap up point. Before we do that, I do just want to give a bit of a background on me, to give, and I probably should have done this at the start, but we talk about reform, we talk about cutting taxes, and we talk about competition, and at times when we talk about these things, it can sound heartless, right? It can sound like we don't care about people. And that's not true. You know, I know you care about people. I care about people deeply. I care about everybody. These policies sound like that they don't care about people, but they do. These are really the most moral policies you can have. And I live my life as a classical liberal. I'm not a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm right in the middle. Classical liberal. I live my life to those values. And that's because you know, I can sit here and people can watch this and say, oh, it's good for him to say he runs HR Nicholl Society. You know, he's wealthy. He was born into money. I wasn't born into money. Right now, I could show you around. I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment here, right? You know, I'm not earning big bucks. I grew up in housing commission flats. I grew up on food stamps and handouts from religious institutions. I think I've been baptized about 12 times from different churches just so that we could get the benefits of, you know, that they wouldn't provide benefits without doing that, or without being a member of the church. And so I think I'm a Jehovah's Witness, I'm a Catholic, a Christian, Irish Catholic, I'm Orthodox somewhere. We used to have Jehovah's Witnesses come around. So I'm pretty much everything. So I came from nothing. I was living in a dingy flat in terrible, terrible neighborhoods. People would get stabbed down the street. We would survive on milk and bread for a week. Single mom, 4 kids, working just to provide for us, right? And that is where I'm coming from. And I know someone like Brian Marlow, the executive director of the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, he's very much the same. And I know a lot of people from the IPA are. The reason why I hold these views and the reason why I advocate for these policies is because I know they work. I know that hard work and I know that personal responsibility, don't blame anyone else for your lot in life because, yeah, okay, it might have been someone else's fault, but you blaming them is not going to help you. It's not going to help anyone. Take responsibility, say, well, enough is enough, get up, make something of yourself. If you need to work, I've worked 130 hours in a week. For years I did that. I've worked right now. I do HR Nicholl Society. I work for another not-for-profit out of DC. And I have 2 other jobs. I work at a law firm and I still have time for extracurriculars and my wife. Stop making excuses for yourself. Take some personal responsibility. Work harder. You might have to put in the hard yards for a couple of years, but it works. It works. I'm sitting here talking to you today about these policies and these principles because I know they work and I know they are the most moral policies that we can possibly have. And when people start to realize that and when people start to take responsibility for their own lives and not look to anyone else for handouts, it's so liberating. And the dignity that you have from that, people can see it in you and people want to be around you and people want to help you up. And I help people up because I was helped up as well. So I just wanted to say that it seems very simple and very easy to sit here and, from our ivory towers to say, well, let's do these policies. But the moral case is that these policies work. These principles are true. They're right. And they will serve you better than looking for someone for a handout or blaming someone for your poor choices. And I apologize if that sounds, it sounds terrible, but that's the reality.
It sounds 100%, mate, and I think that's sort of everything this channel's trying to sort of portray or teach or instill in people. That's why we have such a broad range of guests and topics, and we have a apostolic Catholic father on here, and I'm by no means a Christian of any sorts. I'm sort of fairly.
Don't tell him I've been baptized 14 times or whatever it is.
I'm pretty sure he'll watch this, but he's sensible enough to have a broad view on things. So, mate, I think that's the perfect wrap up. Thank you so much. Hopefully we can get you on again, a few more times. I mean, we've got plenty of material for the next couple of weeks, which is great. But, mate, yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we can support you guys a little bit more. We'll put all the HR Nicholl's links in the description. If there's anything you want to say as far as contacting you to become members, let us know, and we'll put in some ads and stuff like that for you or whatever. And yeah, look, thanks so much,
mate. Thanks very much for having me on. I think fantastic what you're doing here, and it's always a pleasure to have a chat to you. And hopefully we can do it over a pint or 2 or 12 sometime.
Or 12, yeah, for sure. Thanks, John. You have a good day.
You too. Thanks, mate.